something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Before the main discussion today, I want to thank all of our Patreon subscribers for their support. If it weren't for all of you, we would not be able to do this. If you are not a subscriber, you are missing out on hundreds of hours of content which illuminate the organized criminal entity that is the U.S. Empire. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception.
Patrick Lawrence, great to be back with you.
How good to see you again, Aaron. Thank you very much.
Well, you have been busy writing and going around the world, and your partner has as well, and we may be talking to her in coming weeks about her work on Palestine. But you are a career journalist who's gone independent in recent years, and I'd like to start off maybe talking about where people can find your work, because you were disappeared from Twitter for a while, and but you're a great essayist. I recommend your essays all the time, and we'll talk about some of them. But let's start off by telling people where they can find you now that you're finally returned from Twitter prison or wherever they put you.
Twitter tundra, Twitter Siberia. Thank you very much. Yes, yeah, it was sort of a blow. Social media is not my favorite space, but it's very important for getting one's work disseminated, and it was quite a blow when I was censored, whatever our word is, barred, banished. I'm publishing now at several independent publications. One is Censorship News. That's probably my anchor. Also, ScheerPost, SCHEER Post, ScheerPost.com. Our X account, we are now reinstated, is, surprise, surprise, at the Flautist. And I'd love it if your audience would consider diving in to the traffic there.
Yes, I will put links to the Substack and to the Twitter accounts, or Twitter X. It's at the Flautist on Twitter, and they did kick you off. And what seemed to me one of the more dubious and kind of inexplicable examples of them kicking a person off of social media, because you weren't an incendiary or inflammatory person who would get in, who would defame, famous people or important people or whatever. You didn't break any rules, as best I could tell, and they just 86'd you from Twitter. It was really something that happened.
Yeah.
And what year was that happened?
That was 3 years ago. That means, yes, it was either the last day of March 2022 or the first day of April. I can't remember. I was sitting at the breakfast table, and it was my habit to go through the Twitter feed and respond, briefly to regular followers with whom one has sort of casual conversations, right? And all of a sudden, it went blank. And then a couple of hours later, it came back briefly, and then it went blank again, and it was permanent. They never give you an explanation. You mentioned the rules. I never broke any rules. Well, the catch, Aaron, is they don't tell you what the rules are. The rules are invisible. That's how despots all over the world in history preserve their prerogative. You have rules, but you don't tell people what the rules are with any specificity. So in any given case, the rules can mean what you want. Kara's theory, she holds to it pretty with some conviction, is my comments on Israel. Right?
I can believe that.
This was a year after the Al-Aqsa mess in May of 21, and I had come out in some pieces at that time saying, look, by this preposterous definition of anti-Semitism, with vigorous objection, but also perfect indifference, I'm an anti-Semite, because you're not going to get me to stop commenting on these things, right? The Kara's theory is that the only other possibility would be Ukraine, the Ukraine stuff.
Right, which was another, but the timing of it was just strange. It was strange that this happened under Obama or under Biden, but I suppose the control of kind of left of center people who might be, people who follow you might be on the left side of Democrats or previously on the Democratic Party or on the left liberal side of things. And I think that you becoming such an anti-imperialist may have, in recent decades, may have been exactly the kind of thing that they wanted to keep off of social media. That would be my guess. But let's talk about some of the things that you have written about recently. You have one on Trump, Bibi, and Andran's ghost. That was from a few weeks ago. And you point out the absurdity of Bibi's recent talking about Trump as a man of peace, right? And when we know he's spoke of nominating him for the Nobel Peace Prize, which goes beyond even parody of a parody. It's so strange what we're experiencing now. And you connect this to Ayn Rand and this kind of emptiness that it represents in terms of being anchored in any kind of morality, any Western or otherwise, that it just turns narcissism and greed into the defining virtue. I mean, explain how you see the crassness of Trump and Bibi as related to this kind of ideology or mythology for American oligarchs, essentially.
Yeah.
Grab as much money as you can, and it's good. You're a good guy.
Some of the readers of that piece misunderstood, took it that I was naming Ayn Rand as some kind of powerful personage in the construction of neoliberal ideology or what have you, or free market fundamentalism. No, she was just a kind of she was just the sort of figure who represented it in cultural terms, right? As more as a consciousness. Okay, she didn't exercise direct political power or any of that. She was more like emblematic. Her novels were what do I want to say? Totemic. Okay, and The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged. They weren't very well received among serious people at the time, but there are a lot of unserious people in high places, and they were emblematic of an ethos, just as you were saying before, Aaron. Profit, the accumulation of capital, is the only value, right? Market fundamentalism taken to its logical extreme, and I looked at that. To return to the occasion, I looked at that scene with Netanyahu and Trump. And I thought, look at these people are out and out criminals. Probably two of the most inhumane people with considerable degrees of power among us right now. You know, Netanyahu, I was going to say especially Netanyahu, I'll withhold that. I'm not sure Trump is any better. But murderers, right? And yet, look at them. Are they how to say? Are they purposefully hypocritical? Is this all just a performance? And Medea Benjamin said, made a remark, I quoted it in the piece, how surreal is this? Well, I thought about that, and I thought, I think we have to go deeper psychologically to the point where we're able to recognize that these people take themselves seriously as sitting at the zenith of humanity and accomplishment. And how could they think that? Well, there's your Ayn Rand connection, you know. That's
right.
That's,
it's deeper. It's very deep in our culture in different ways. Even the things that we don't typically associate with the crude, you know, kind of idiocy of Ayn Rand's, you know, writing, which was sort of panned by literary critics and by people who know anything about sociology, history, political economy, etc., etc. But if you look at the ideas of, you know, exalting individualism and pursuit of wealth and profit, this is, you know, the Protestant work ethic, the Puritans who considered themselves to be the visible saints if they were successful, if they were thrifty and prosperous, wealthy. They took it as a sign that they were, as a manifestation of the fact that they were favored by God, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and this seems to be the founding of, I mean, the U.S. was founded by the Virginia Company and the Massachusetts Bay Company, and the Pilgrims were a smaller contingency, and they were basically refugees from capitalism as well because of the enclosure movement and so on. You can read in their writings that, you know, even with Winthrop, who was a Puritan, but they were saying in England a sheep is more prized than a man, right? They said things like that, which was a reference to the fact that capitalists had taken the land and made it impossible for them to live, so they had to go endure hardships and cross the ocean, right? But then if they did, and they killed all the local inhabitants and made a bunch of money, that was a sign God was on their side. So this seems to just be in the DNA of the U.S. And there's no pomp and circumstance of aristocracy. There's just business.
You put it better than I, Aaron. Thank you. I'm trying to get at the fact that the ethos, the radical individualism of that Rand's rather shabby, poor books represented is in the air we breathe. It's part of the American consciousness at this point, to such an extent that we're not even aware of it. Right? It's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, however you wish to put it. Right? And it's at the very root of what's driving this country into such swift decline, if you ask me, right?
Right, and historically, empires sow the seeds of their own destruction. I mean, that is the dialectic of imperialism, that they're propelled by greed and lust for power, and then they essentially seek too much of it, and it's their undoing.
Yeah. Now, we ran an interesting picture on the top of that column. It was Jerry Ford. Who was next to him?
I think I have it pulled up somewhere, so I can try to find it. But
some other figure at that, his national security advisor or somebody, not Kissinger, but somebody of that stature, and Rand. Okay.
Yeah, you have Gerald Ford, Kissinger and Alan Greenspan.
Alan Greenspan. It was Jerry Ford, Alan Greenspan,
Not Kissinger, but yeah, Ford
and Ayn Rand and some other people around them.
She
I thought it was a very
pretty weird too. There.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting picture because there's a certain rarity to it. My point subliminally was to say Ayn Rand was never that visible as an influence, right? She didn't sit in the councils of government or any of that. That's what made that picture rare. It was a manifestation of her presence, but her presence was generally kind of more suffused. It was invisible. It was invisible and everywhere apparent, right? If I can put it that way. That's why I chose that picture, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty wild one. Probably I might use that on the graphic for the episode because it's so funny. She has just a weird, like sort of crooked smirk on her face. It's like I don't belong, or where am I? Like a James Stockdale or whatever in the debate '92. Who am I? Why am I here? So she doesn't belong there, but she's there with Greenspan.
There is a straight line between that gathering in the Oval Office and the Trump Bibi encounter in the Blue Room at the White House, which was the occasion for the column. The same set of values applies, right? That's my point.
Yeah. Right, and that seems to be that's our downfall, that we have created this society where this selfishness is a virtue, and where as much money as you can get, it's actually the best, and you're the hero of civilization if you're the person who is on top. It goes against these sort of moral metaphysics that arise in civilizations that kind of balance out those tendencies, that whether it's Confucianism or noblesse oblige in the West, different things are supposed to keep things from getting too insane like they have now. But we disregarded them and just put greed at the top of everything, and that this is kind of what you get. To me, it's like in the ancient world, you had people would make sacrifices to gods, so they would commit female infanticide, and the Incas, for example, did that due to population pressures and so on. This became sort of ingrained in them as something that made the world work, made their civilization function, and it was like they would make these sacrifices, and even though it would be brutal to kill your own daughters, this was something that was done. And in our society, it's like we have resigned ourselves to, of course everything's going to get more expensive, and life can only get worse because we just have to pay these exorbitant fees for housing and healthcare and everything else to support this class of oligarchs. It's like the market is this God's king or something, that we're just like, if the market says this is how it must be, I have to appease the angry God, so I guess we just all must suffer forever. It is such a complete reversal and refutation of the Enlightenment and any notion of human progress in that. But that's where we are.
It's the abdication of reason. The abdication of reason. The market, which is not a sentient creature, knows best. How does that work? Well, what people say, we're kind of getting a little off here, but what people say, that the market knows best, capital distribution and all that sort of thing. What they're saying is, I abdicate my capacity to make a judgment here because the market will do it, right? It completely illogical, as you say, completely contradicts Enlightenment ideals and so on, right?
Yeah. And their monument is all around us, and it gets increasingly unhinged and kind of lunatic, really, in the ways it's attempting to uphold the status quo and to crush human reason and human morality where it might rear its head.
Yeah.
so to speak. And you wrote another article that I think gets into the sort of illogic that reigns today. It's called Darkness Descending, and it's on anti-Semitism at Columbia. And how do you let's look at Columbia as a case of just counter-enlightenment. I mean, describe the thesis of the piece here, because it's obviously looking at this insane application of anti-Semitism, quote unquote.
Well, the the term anti-Semitism has been a couple of things have happened to that term. Everybody prefaces their comments on the question of anti-Semitism by saying, "Of course, there's anti-Semitism." Well, I haven't really seen much. I'm not going to bother with that preface. I suppose there must be some, but Biden's phrase was a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism. I'm sorry, there's no such thing. So you have to say what is being conveyed here. Well, I think anti-Semitism has been instrumentalized, and that very wise rabbi I quoted in Los Angeles observed that Jews are being used for other purposes, and this is a radical attack on free speech, academic freedom, and so on. And I think the larger point here, and this is why I took up the Columbia case, the occasion was Columbia accepted the quotation marks working definition of anti-Semitism advanced by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA. This is the famous definition that it has a lot of verbiage in it, but the sum of it is criticizing Israel as an act of anti-Semitism. Okay, Columbia had just accepted that. That was the occasion for the piece.
This is a very strange organization, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. To put out this definition is so strange, especially to include in that definition the assertion that to criticize Israel as a racist endeavor, full stop, that's you're an anti-Semite if you think that. That's ridiculous. But also you're not allowed to compare them to the Nazis is anti-Semitic for some reason.
Yeah, well, look, Israel is a racist endeavor. We better watch out because we've just said it, right? To object to that observation is to say night is day. I mean, it's by the definition of its founders, Ben Gurion and so on. Of course, it's a racist endeavor. It describes itself as a Jewish state. Well, okay. Let us not forget the General Assembly at some point in the 70s or 80s declared Zionism a form of racism. That was a General Assembly resolution until the Americans got it repealed sometime in the early 90s. So what are we talking about here? At the horizon, we're talking about a sort of incipient thought control, right? Another thing I objected to, hatred. The Germans, the Europeans are running really long on outlawing hatred. Excuse me, hatred is a human emotion. There are plenty of things to hate. I don't spend a lot of time hating people, but I certainly want to be able to do so if I feel like it, right? Now, what I'm getting at, let's get back to message here. What I'm getting at is the Trump regime knows very well what it is about in attacking institutions of higher learning because that's where character, consciousness, perspective, faculties of reason, most important, discernment. Okay, I like the word discernment by way of the Jesuit definition, the capacity for autonomous judgment, right? That's where all these faculties and capacities are formed among young people, and that's what they're going after. To me, the most frightening thing about this is they're going after the very foundations of what it means to be a mature, realized human being.
Well, to have a functional civilization and society, because recently, I might have been the Financial Times or something, some mainstream, basically conservative, business-friendly outlet published a list with the rankings of the top universities worldwide, and a good number of them are in China now, in the top 10. And that is a completely new development. And meanwhile, you look at places like Indiana University and other major research universities, the U.S. is gutting its higher education and otherwise trying to hamstring it and bring it into sort of top-down control in different ways. So we are crushing our own university system to pursue very short-sighted political objectives for the oligarchy, really, at a time when we most need to be able to compete in the production of human knowledge and the advancement of technology. It is just amazing.
Yeah, let me jump in. You used the phrase short-term political objectives, okay? These people, the Trump people, the education minister, secretary, and so on, right? Rubio, they view this whole thing in very narrow terms, having to do with a certain strain of republicanism and mainstream Democrats, liberals, and so that whole frame of reference. They are too stupid to understand the larger implications of this and the shocking destruction they are bringing to the foundations of American society, right? Now, as culpable as it, as culpable as anybody in this, Columbia capitulated.
Yeah,
I gather Harvard is putting up a bit of a fight, but I gather they all will eventually. What was it? Brown just struck a deal to this. It's just, I don't know what I would think if I were 18 and applying to university, or the parent of an 18-year-old. I just can't understand where this is all headed, other than in a very bad direction. That's why Claire Shipman, acting president of Columbia, the universities are complicit in this campaign of destruction by way of their capitulation. And what does it tell us, Aaron? In high places, there is no locus, there is no site of resistance. There's no site of an alternative way of constructing and managing society. It's
right. And we're not a country that is comprised entirely of psychopathic, immoral individuals. And yet, when it comes to any institutions of power that wield any power or influence, this higher immorality prevails. As C. Wright Mills, spoke about in the 1950s, he saw this clearly when other people didn't and would have denied it. But now he was very prescient. He called it the complete divorce of mind from power, which basically means wisdom from power. And he pointed out that at the top of these institutions, this was the metaphysic that prevailed, was just a kind of adherence to the main drift of power.
Who are you quoting? Who are you quoting here?
I'm sort of summarizing C. Wright Mills. He spoke about the higher immorality, right, and the divorce of mind from power or wisdom from power, and that it prevailed at the top of society and all these organizations. So you don't get to rise in these organizations if you are not a person who has shown themselves to be amenable to the dictates of power.
Yeah, the name
all over the place.
The name.
You know him, C. Wright Mills.
Oh, C. Wright Mills, of course. Yeah, which one?
Power Elite.
The Power Elite. You and I have talked about that book before. Right. Exactly. Right.
And this prevails, and it seems the higher up you go, the more you can be assured of the fact that the characters are completely subservient to corporate power and the status quo and this oligarchic, lawless regime that we have in general.
Apart from what we will discuss this morning, I'll mention I'm starting an essay called "The Age of Unreason," right? And the title tells you where I'm headed. I think we have entered into a time of rampant irrationality for precisely what the reasons you're talking about, right? And I'm calling it the age of unreason in order to indicate, Aaron, I for a long time I thought, well, things are pretty mad, but this is temporary. We'll get back to sensible procedures, government.
Like a pendulum.
Yeah.
You expect the pendulum to swing.
What are we talking about? Sometime between the last time you and I spoke and now, it's come to me. We're not coming back from this. I don't know where we're headed, but we're not going back to any kind of Kennedy era soundness of purpose or any of that. No, I don't think so.
But let me say this, and because I agree with you, the metaphor of a pendulum does not seem applicable, because you may have thought that, well, you do these bad policies, then it's going to create realities that show those were bad policies, and then it will require course correction. Otherwise, there will be social and political consequences. Mm-hmm. Well, they have gone about as long as you can without making any corrections and basically just making everything worse. So it's not a pendulum. It's more of I don't even know what, a ramrod that just gets, that reams and reams, and that's all that it does. I don't know what else to say about it. But that said, it does seem to be creating the powers that will bring it down. I think that the global majority is reaching a consensus, if on nothing else, and these are countries and populations with different political views, different civilizational inheritances, and so on. But what is really clear is that the West and the U.S. and this dollarized world are not good for humanity, and that they are immoral and illegitimate, and that they need to be transcended. And I do think that, led by China probably, because they are the leading in technology and human development aspects, the world, the non-white world, is about to transcend the West, and it's already happened in fundamental ways. Yeah. Our trajectory is so clearly downward, and theirs is steadily upward. And the more they can separate from us, the better they do. And that's more obvious to people, and that's only going to further hasten this process.
I think our one of our fundamental problems for those of us living today and trying to understand the world around us is that we are at a world historical moment of the sort it would be much nicer not to live through, but here we are, right? When 500 years of Western superiority are coming to a close, the leadership in the West cannot face this. This is to my mind, the basic source of all our conflicts, right? And indeed, I think a new world order, that's our phrase, I think it's on the way, a little at a time. And it's going to require a lot of new understandings among us. And one of them is the importance of recognizing different traditions, cultures, histories, psychologies, societies, and giving up our long habit of saying, wait a minute, those Chinese, they're not very democratic over there, right? Well, that may be so, depending on how you define your terms, but that's not our concern. Our concern must be now to refrain from saying, here is our idea of democracy, and anyone who doesn't measure up to it, we don't approve. We have to be able to look at the world from the perspectives of other people and understand that they will be different. But that's okay. If the Chinese want to be want to organize themselves in a way other than they are now, that's good. That's the Chinese task, problem, whatever you want to call it. It's not ours, right? And this is an essential point if we are going to support the emergence of a new world order, instead of, as I have good friends in England and elsewhere who say, no, look at those Russians, look at those Chinese. You can't be happy about what's happening.
I mean, the Uyghur genocide, don't forget about that.
Yeah.
The Uyghur, but if you look at Xinjiang, life expectancy is rising and literacy is rising, but that's just part of genocide, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very strange. And really what you're saying, that we don't have the right to, or it's just there's no basis for us to go around looking at the world, other countries, and saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. Listen to us. We know what's right. This is like fundamental to whiteness in my understanding of it. This is the real white privilege that white people need to disabuse themselves of. It's not about microaggressions. It's about a whole mentality of whitey is the righteousness force of the world.
It's Western centrism and the imperative of overcoming Western centrism. One's vision is immediately transformed if you can. Nietzsche had a great phrase, a couple of ways he put it. Taking off the garb of the West, right? That's the task, right? And, as he put it in another of his books, getting in our boats and rowing out beyond our own shores and turning around to look and seeing what we see. He was talking about what's called perspectivism, to cultivate the capacity to understand things from different perspectives. I consider it among the true imperatives of the 21st century, right? I'll name others if you want, but to stay with this one, this is America's big problem, right? If you're Belgian and you get in the car and drive 2 hours, you're not in Belgium anymore, right? If you're German, Russia's right there, right? Et cetera, et cetera. In America, you can drive for 5 days or more and you don't see anything other than Americans, and you don't read anything other than American newspapers, et cetera, et cetera.
But if you encounter anybody speaking a foreign language, you become agitated. And, that would be part of the equation sometimes.
Yeah, this combined with our radical individuality. Remember, we are the ones who turned individuality, which is a naturally occurring phenomenon in in humanity. We are the ones who turned it into individualism and ideology, right? So our geographic isolation and our radical individualism are our big problems, you know.
And there are problems for in terms of, I believe that the left or the liberals, however you want to characterize this individualism is a huge part of why they are so feckless.
Yeah.
Because they sort of, the culture war aspect, we live in a lawless regime that is bent on global dominance and has a record of murdering and dispossessing and exploiting so many people on behalf of an oligarchic project. It's really vicious, and there's a cult of individualism that kind of propels it among sort of conservative capitalist forces. But the left, it embraces individualism. They sort of got derailed in the 60s, you know, like by people like Tim Leary, who I suspect was CIA. And he worked for the CIA. He did a personality test for them that was used for decades. But the counterculture that emerged, that was like, with Tim Leary, he said politics is an old man's game. It's for impotent old men. Don't think about that. Free your mind. It's all about you. You know, tune in and drop out. Right. And this I think extends to the present. These sort of liberation struggles of like being extremely fixated on sort of these culture war issues. I mean, it's not that I'm for gay marriage and so on, and I'm for abortion rights and all of this, but a lot of these culture war issues end up creating a left that's like kind of puritanical and an elitist kind of, I say left in quotation marks, because if you live under a regime where there really isn't much democracy, they can murder anyone they want, and they're bent on global dominance and imperialism, that's really the only political issue that is of much importance. But for people on a lot of the traditions or currents of the left, which get institutional support and money, so go figure, they are for this kind of individualistic focus. Like the personal is political. That was treated as like a courageous thing to say. The personal is political, and my personhood and my perspective is very, very important and must not be violated above all else. It's so strange.
A devastatingly misleading sort of aphorism, right? The personal is political. I'm glad you offered me the quotation marks around left, because in the American case, we need them. There's no point in talking about a left in America unless you have the quotation marks, right? And my take on these things you're talking about here, Aaron, is that the 60s, the anti-war movement, and the April 75 was a very consequential time. The wars in Southeast Asia were over and the Americans lost, right? And since then, I think there's been a tendency among people who might otherwise be called left. It's let's call it the Great Flinch. We must be out there. We must be revolutionary. We must be assertive. But we don't want to confront the one damn thing that needs to be confronted, and that is power. So how are we going to do it? Well, let's get lost in the bogus forms of feminism. Let's get lost in cultural junk, right? All these people that forgive the reference, read any copy of The Nation and look at what they're talking about, right? Nobody wants to confront. Everybody wants to be a revolutionary and an assertive dissident, and a big word among these people, subversive. You have to be subversive, right? You read movie reviews, it's a really subversive movie, right? This is kind of a totemic badge, right? But listen and look. What they're doing is performing acts of resistance without confronting power, the single damnedest thing that must be confronted. Why? Because to do so requires the assumption of responsibilities, requires sacrifice, requires changes in the way one may live, etc. Nobody wants to do that. I won't hold forth further because I could take up the rest of our time together on this topic.
Well, you know, people do actually want other things than what is presented right now. I believe the support for things like a national health insurance, the healthcare, for example, is very popular, despite all the propaganda and money going into creating the case for the status quo. So
may I stop you there, Aaron? Let me stop you right there. Yeah, let me stop you right there. You want a new healthcare system. You must look at the healthcare system as it is, as a manifestation of something larger. We're talking about capitalism. We're talking once again about power. So if you're going to be preoccupied with the healthcare system, you get into sort of Clintonian little adjustments. That's not where we don't have time. It's too late on the clock for that. We don't have time for it. The objective now, and people way back in the 60s had the virtue of understanding this. The core project is the confrontation with power. Unless you do, you'll never solve the healthcare problem.
Right, that would have to be overcome. But what I'm saying is, people do want to do that, but they have no way of being able to. People support Medicare for all, for example. They just support everybody having health insurance, not having to deal with these for-profit insurance entities.
Yeah,
but it doesn't matter if they support that. It actually. So what I'm saying is, confronting power would mean changing the way that people live, but I think the majority of people would be fine with that. But there is no mechanism for channeling the public will into actual policy. And this is more acute now than any time that I've been observing politics. The disconnect between what leaders in the West are doing and what their populations want has never been bigger. And you do wonder how long it can go like this, because it's too unstable.
Our mediating institutions, the institutions through which one is supposed to be able to express oneself, have been completely stripped, right? It's like they've been asset stripped by some
capital firm,
crazy venture capitalist or something. There's nothing left of them, right? So where does that leave us? Well, we have another judgment now that requires us to be very honest, and when we draw our conclusions, recognizing that our judgment imposes certain responsibilities upon us. That judgment is, how do we express ourselves if the mediating institutions that form the structure of a democratic society are broken? How do we do that?
If they're all fundamentally anti-democratic in their functioning.
The street, isn't it the street? Don't we need another movement? Let's look at this. Let's look at this phenomenon I just wrote about in that piece I sent you overnight. Suddenly, the term genocide is going mainstream, right?
Right.
The French.
Better late than never, I suppose.
Yeah, I actually used that phrase in the piece. The French, the Brits, the Canadians, the Maltese, all sorts of countries are now saying we're going to recognize Palestine. Now they're recognizing that they're supporting a two-state solution, which is silly, but still.
I don't know that they say that on the surface that is the case, but I just think recognizing a Palestinian state is notable.
Oh, that's the point of my column. This is what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
Why is the word genocide now becoming acceptable in so-called polite company? Why is it acceptable in the pages of the New York Times? Because people have manifest themselves in very large numbers by way of demonstrations and protests. This is my point. I'm just using this question of the growing acceptance of the term genocide as an example of the exercise of power in societies where there are no functioning institutions typical of a democratic process. Popular manifestations of dissent. I think we're at a time, I don't mean to sound over dramatic, but I think we're at a time where this kind of thing is all that we have left.
Yeah.
Chris Hedges gave a very, very interesting interview the other day with Mara Finkelstein. Mara Finkelstein is that tenured professor at Muhlenberg College who was fired, tenured, but fired because of her advocacy for the Palestinian cause, right? And she had some very well-spoken woman, right? She had some very remarkable things to say at the end of her talk with Hedges. And one of them was, we are at a moment when we must all, if we want to get things done, we must all be willing to make sacrifices. And she said, my salary wasn't much at Muhlenberg, but I don't have even that now. And you know how I feel? I feel liberated. I can say what I want, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to sound melodramatic to your audience, but I think we must face that we are at this kind of moment when going to the polls every 4 years is not the exercise of one's civic self.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a similar. I wouldn't. Her situation is very different from mine. But when I was in graduate school, I went there after Obama won in 2008, and then in 2009 he continues all these Bush policies that were criminal,
right? And
that I had hoped that he would reverse. At one point, he says that we thought about prosecuting the Bush people for torture and so on, but we were afraid that there might be a military coup, so we didn't. Okay, so certain things like this.
Did he actually say that?
Yes. Certain things like that opened my eyes to this criminality that transcends the administrations and is bigger than both parties. And then it made me look back at things like the Kennedy assassinations, 9/11, Iran-Contra, Watergate, all these issues where the criminality bubbled to the surface. And then in all of these cases, they never get adjudicated. And so this is what I wanted to study. And I was going to write a dissertation that grappled with these things and their implications for our understanding of the system that we live in. Now, it did have the effect of making me pretty much unemployable by my reckoning as a tenured professor. So I did the only thing that I could. I ended up taking, a pay cut, not a huge one ultimately, but from my high school teaching job. But at least I can speak about what I know about and what I have researched and what I've basically made my life's work, which is trying to explain this regime and the criminality of it all.
Well, Aaron, good. I want to mention something right here. When I was talking about Mara Finkelstein and the question of sacrifice and the question of liberation, I had your situation in the back of my mind, and I said, I don't know whether Aaron has told his audience about his story or not. So I'm really pleased you have. It's a perfect case in point, right?
I appreciate that too. But you yourself have been similar. You were a journalist, and you were employed as a journalist for many years, and you began to write more essays and eventually put them into books about the darkness at the top of this whole system and the illegitimacy of it all, and trying to grapple with it. And but what's fascinating to me is you do hear more people speaking along these lines, like Jeffrey Sachs. He interviewed me and endorsed my book, which was amazing. But for me, And when I listen to him speak now, he often sounds like he's giving sort of a summary of it whenever he explains the West.
Yeah.
And you hear other people say, like, well, of course, this is an ultimately lawless system. So I want to think that people have had an impact on the sense-making, especially as, you point out, our sense-making institutions are all corrupted. And yet people want to know the truth, especially when it comes to problems that they see are obviously not being solved and that are getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. So this is where I think that there has been some contribution here, although I don't know, and I hope to have been a part of it, but I don't know how it can eventually be brought to bear. And this is the moment that we're living through. It's what do you do when there's nothing that you can do, and yet you also know things can't really stay the same.
Exactly. I think a couple of points here. First of all, as I put in the columns once in a while, don't miss the optimism at the bottom of all the apparent pessimism, okay? Second point, I don't think looking back is especially useful now. For example, the use of the word fascism, it's a question whether by scholarly definitions we've got a fascist regime now. Okay, I get the idea that that's a question, but the word kind of faces us backwards, and I don't think the past is that much of a guide for us now. I think we have to look out front and say, no maps. We have to find our way. We have to get our machetes and cut the path, right? There's no precedent for our circumstances now for a great many different reasons.
Right. When you look at when this all began, you just imagine Christopher Columbus, some white guy, perhaps a slightly swarthy white guy, but still history will have to record him as a white guy, landing in the Caribbean, saying like, wow, nice place, nice people, let's enslave them and murder them and steal all their shit, right? Like, but when you think of the technology, and that's, we could mark that as the genesis of this modern era. When you think of the technology that they had back then, the world they were living in, and they've been curating the world ever since then in different ways. And so we can't even think back to it. Seems immutable to us. It seems so permanent to us.
Technological advances change things. As we were saying before, the emergence of the non-West, making a parity between West and non-West a 21st century reality. You can't, with these sorts of things, we have to look forward and build something new. Of course you can always learn from the past, but my point is, let's not get lost in it. We're at a world historical.
Right. I agree. I mean, I don't, the way of dealing with our history and terminology, well, I'm a social scientist and historian, so those are things that I do understand. But I take your point about there being no analogy that can really guide us into what needs to be done, because not only is this a global empire with more wealth and power than any other in world history, it possesses the technological capability to destroy the species, quite possibly, or all species on the planet, even potentially.
Yeah.
Or by and large, I mean, I guess some microbes and cockroaches and stuff could survive nuclear winter and all of this, but this is a totally novel thing, and confronting it is the task of every serious intellectual, I think, right now.
If this, I don't know how you'll take this, Aaron. I'll be interested in your response, right? I think if you step back sufficiently and discern the direction of things, the United States, the imperium, is not doing well. It's declining, right? All its manifestations abroad, Ukraine, the mess in West Asia and so forth, are not going well, right? We need to distinguish at some point between, I do this sometimes, it's an old theme, between strong nations and merely powerful nations, okay? We, the United States, is a very powerful nation, but it's not a strong nation anymore, right? If you look from a sufficient distance, I think there's an argument that we're headed certainly in a new direction, and I think a good one. As we were saying before about the emergence of a new world order. It's happening. And that's a good thing, right?
It is a good thing.
American decline is a good thing.
Right. That's this paradox. I don't look forward to the difficult implications to my material existence that could result from this and the sort of insecurity. But overall, you have to take the big picture and say, this must end and be derailed for humanity to have any chance of a decent future. Yeah. These people have to be dethroned. We cannot have humanity cannot have these two clownish, sinister figures like Bibi and Trump. And I realize they represent more powerful oligarchic factions, but the fact that this is the best that those oligarchs could come up with for us, they don't even come up with convincing frontmen for what they're trying to do. They're clownishly evil to the point that it would be difficult to write, fiction with characters like this, because you would think this isn't plausible to have such vile characters in charge of things. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it takes a slight it takes a slight effort, but to pull back from all the column inches in the newspaper and just give yourself a quiet moment to say, Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Not Jack Kennedy, not FDR, not Lincoln. No, he sits at the same desk as all those sorts of people. Donald Trump. What does that tell you? You know?
Right.
It's
a profound counterpoint to any notion of white supremacy, right? Like this is it, people. This is the pinnacle. This is the leader of the free world, and so it's going to it would seem to be on its way to destroying itself. But that's not to say that we should be passive. I feel like what we do have is the ability to talk about it and to write about it still. Yeah. And you're doing that, and I think we should point people again to your website, on Substack, which is a way for people to support you in the work that you do. It's The Flautist. I'll put a link in the show notes, and I will put a link to your Twitter/X handle, which is @TheFlautist, and encourage people to follow you there. And do you have any final words here as we wrap up?
Yeah, I do. I wrote a book. I wrote a book. Yale published it about a decade ago. Okay. Called Time No Longer, Americans After the American Century. Okay, at the start of it, I said, counting from 2001, which I count as the rather peculiarly precise end of the American century, counting from 2001, America has 25 years to decide how it is going to move into a new era, post-primacy, however you wish to put it, a new time with of parity and so on, right? We can do this one of two ways. We can do this imaginatively, wisely, some courage, some insight into what this new world, what our new circumstances will look like, and the positive dimensions of them, which would be many, or we can do this. We can do this violently, right? We can do this destructively, right? We have 25 years to make that decision. We didn't need 25 years, right? The decision, and in a certain way, Aaron, my construct was theoretical because it was perfectly plain that those in power had no great reservoir of imagination, wisdom, and not to speak of courage, right? Okay, but my point is the decision was made how America is going to pass into the 21st century. The leadership in this country, one way of putting this is they just don't like the 21st century. They really prefer the 20th, right? How are they going to pass into the 21st century? Well, violently and messily, look out our windows. But they are going to pass, we are going to move into it ungracefully or otherwise. We are going to move into it, and that's my final point. Something new is coming. You can't stop the hands on history's clock.
No, unless you blow it up along with everything else, which does seem to be the main concern. I feel that as long as we avoid nuclear doomsday, there's time for correction and application of human reason and morality to solving human problems. And so this is the optimism that I see. It's not it's not in our leaders who are inept and immoral and corrupt, and it's in a system systemically so. They're in a system where if they weren't corrupt, they wouldn't be our leaders. And this is what we're faced with, and it must change because it's so unsustainable on its face. It's a blueprint or an abstract for a paper just explaining the fundamentals of imperial decline. That is our system on the surface now, and people recognize it. Whether they understand the Epstein thing, or they're looking at Israel, or they're looking at how difficult it is to get by in this country, more and more people know it, and the rest of the world is looking on in horror at us. And this is a recipe for the loss of legitimacy, the loss of hegemony that we see in empires throughout history.
You prompt me to end with a really wonderful occasion I had in India many years ago. I spent a long afternoon interviewing this very prominent sociologist. His name is Shiv Viswanathan. Okay, Shiv had lots of books out and so forth, and we had discussed over many hours India's very many and very critical problems. And I said, Shiv, I always end my interviews with this question: are you an optimist or a pessimist? He didn't miss a beat. He leaned across his desk and said, an optimist, of course. Why would I bother otherwise?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good note to end on. Yeah. And Patrick Lawrence, I thank you very much for joining us again. And I'll encourage people to visit your and patronize your sites. Thank you again.
You're very kind. Wonderful to be with you, Aaron. And next time. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. I want to express my deepest appreciation to all of our American Exception subscribers. If you are not a subscriber, please consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Thank you for tuning in and helping us bring light to the devil's chessboard.